The title of my paper, of my project here, is The Guitar Style of Toninho Horta in Selected Recordings from 1988 to 1992. I'm investigating 3 recordings. So for those of you, just a very brief introduction on who Toninho Horta is. He might show up at some time, I'm not sure. But he's a Brazilian guitar player from the state of Minas Gerais, associated with a group of musicians called Clube da Esquina, which had Milton Nascimento, which is probably the most well-known name. And Toninho Horta grew up playing with these guys from Clube da Esquina. And he has a very unique style, especially his approach to harmony. He's also a soloist. He plays single lines. But he basically came up with very inventive innovations in the field of harmony. That's basically what I'm going to be talking about. So I have 5 transcriptions that I did, and I think I can just jump into talking about because there are many musical examples that I want to talk about. And as I said, I'm investigating 3 albums. The first one from 1988 is called Diamond Land, and the tune that I decided to transcribe from there is called Beijo Partido, which is one of his most well-known tunes. It was recorded by Earth, Wind and Fire. It's kind of unusual, even for him. It was a little bit of a surprise in the late 70s. But so what I'm going to do, actually, for all the 5 examples, I'm going to play first what I transcribed, which is usually not much, like 1 section or 1 chorus. And then I'll talk about the most, I'll just select a few elements and talk specifically about them. So here's my transcription of Beijo Partido. Okay, so I made like a compilation, a short version of the whole thing, just because I'm going to talk about a couple of elements of the outro and the intro and everything. So diving in as I said, I'm going to be talking about harmony mostly. So a few elements that we can talk about that define the style of Toninho Horta. There are a couple that will be recurrent here, and I can mention them right up front first. The use of open chords using a very open and wide, large voicings, using 5 strings or all 6 strings. As you can see in this intro here, he plays. Lands on this E minor. It's a huge sound, right? Kind of orchestral. Usually jazz guitarists can get away with playing only on the top 5 strings, right? Or using voicings with only 4 notes. Toninho likes to use like fuller sounds. So that's it. And we can find other voices like that. But in terms of harmony, more specifically, there are another element that we can talk about, how a few voices that he uses that can be viewed from very different angles. So once again, back in track to the intro. Then he lands here on this. So this voice in particular here, if we look at it from considering the root here, just the bottom note, the note C. This is basically a C minor chord with a minor 7 and a flat 6. It's kind of an unusual sound, but it could also be seen, as we'll see in other examples, that it can be seen. Usually he uses that chord not as a minor flat 6 chord. He uses that as an inversion. So in this case, it could be thinking. That's my interpretation. I think it's a major sound, right? But it could also be used in another context, 2 other contexts that are on My Funny Valentine, for instance. He uses it, thinking it as a minor chord with the root on 5th. So, if I sing the bass. All right. So another element we can see many. I can just mention the main 4 points that are going to be appearing in pretty much every transcription here, which is the use of big voicings using the whole range of the guitar. There is also the use of unusual extensions, which already appeared here if we consider this chord here a minor flat 6. So unusual extensions. Also, his harmonies are always changing. He's usually, so we can call that a polyphonic conception of harmony. Instead of just sitting on the chord, he likes moving internal voices. So that type of thing, very polyphonic conception of harmony. I think that's a good term. And finally, his rhythmic approach to bossa nova. As you could see, I was playing here. I'll get that to that a little later. Let's keep talking about. I mentioned the gigantic E minor. I mentioned this voicing, the minor flat 6 shape. I'm just gonna refer to it as a minor flat 6 shape. Another chord that to me was a little bit of a surprise. Let me put that in context. So it's a 5/1 progression going to E minor. He plays B7 with a flat 5, and then this voicing, and then lands in. And this, if we look at it from isolated just by itself, you can call this chord E flat, major 7. Where's the major 7? Here. And the major, because of the major 3rd here, with a sharp 11 and a sharp 5. Right, so that's a sound we can find on the C melodic minor scale, the 3rd mode. Right, but on this context here, it's used almost like an inversion, as an extension of the B7 sound. Right, and the tritone is still here. Those 2 notes that generate the tension on the dominant chord here, it is still here, kind of obscure, but and then it resolves into E minor. So, and I'm not familiar with piano shapes, piano voicings, but Larry told me this is a very common piano voicing for F7. So, I mean, so But yeah, before guitar, and the fingering for it, as you can see here, it's a little bit strange. The guitar, it requires a bar with your middle finger, which I'm not going to point at you. So cool. Now, really getting into the unusual extensions, this one is fairly unusual. On the third time around the melody, play. On the third time around the A section. So this is what I just showed you. And then instead of resolving in E minor, he gets to that sound here, which is a major chord with a major 7 and a sharp 9 and a sharp 11 on top. So it's a very strange sound, and he also, that one he uses repeatedly. If you go in Minas Gerais, if you say like, oh, a Toninho Horta chord, that's a classic. I will show you in at least in 3 of the 5 out of the 5 examples, different ways that he uses this shape. But yeah, so, and it's very interesting because it has the, I'm calling it sharp 9 here, but if you know a little bit about harmony, you will figure it is also the minor third, right? So if you hear, but it has the major third as well. So it's a very dichotomy, like it's hard to tell. It's a very complex sound, a very rich sound. What else can I say about it? Well, the way he resolves that on Beijo Partido, he just moves, use chord planning, which is you move in the same shape. In this case, he moves it down on half step and go back to the regular resolution that he was doing before in E minor. Cool. Okay, I'm gonna skip a few things here because there's a lot to talk about. Closing up, what I have to say about Beijo Partido, just I mentioned the rhythmic approach. I mean, but everything that I mentioned here will show up on the other tunes as well. So I'm extending a little bit on Beijo Partido because everything will come up again. But the way he's playing the bossa nova feeling here. Right, it's not your usual bossa nova pattern. If you think of players, traditional players like João Gilberto, Carlos Lira, the traditional bossa nova guys, what I came up with 3 ideas basically that Toninho might have been thinking of. One of them is just thinking double time. So I am thinking in 4/4. We have here the subdivision of the beat in 8 notes. That's what is more usual. So ta 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 ta. Right, and the way Toninho, he uses lots of figures based. He seems to be subdividing the beat in 16 notes instead of 8 notes. So so that generates figures like that. Right. So, and then he could one idea he could be thinking of, just like in jazz, it's very common to be playing in 4/4, but kind of implying a double time feel. So if I actually play the double time, it would be like that. Now back to single time. Now mixing them up. Right? So the first idea that seems to be more obvious is that just he's implying double time feel. Also, it could be his music has a lot of influence from pop music. So he could be thinking of, actually some other compositions of his are straight ahead, just a pop groove. So he could be thinking of something like that. Right? Well, as I said in the beginning, Earth, Wind and Fire recorded recorded that song. So it has that type of appeal. And finally, I asked him that, and he said he was a little bit surprised. That's a little bit of a stretch, but he said that it could also be true. That those rhythms that he's using here could also be influenced by rhythms from Brazil's northeast, such as baião or maracatu. So, which if you're not familiar with, I'm just going to play those few chords as if it was a baião. So it would be something like. So anyways, I think there might be a correlation, especially because he plays with musicians from that part of Brazil. He's familiar with that type of music. And off of Beijo Partido, let's move on to the next song. It's called Moonstone. Now it's the second album, and this one I'm going to talk about 2 songs. And so far, I'm only mentioning Toninho's composition, and it's all accompaniment, right? I was deciding whether or not to sing. I decided not to sing. I think that was a good decision. So Moonstone has a lot to do in correlation with Beijo Partido. The rhythm, the way he approaches, it's a bossa nova as well, and he approaches the very similar approach. Also that chord, the minor sharp 9 appears here. And on one recording of that song, it's actually the initial chord. But here I'm going to play a little introduction that he plays on the recording in the album Moonstone. So here's Toninho Horta. It's actually the name in Portuguese is Pedra da Lua, translated into Moonstone. So here we go. Okay, so that's Moonstone. Lots of interesting movements, chord voice leading, and everything. So maybe a little bit more on this chord. If you wonder where does it come from, one scale that it fits. There's a few possibilities, but consider it the 6th note on A flat harmonic minor scale. On the traditional scales, that might be one option. And now here is the resolution for that sound. On Beijo Partido, what he just moved all the top 4 notes a half step down, right? Now on Moonstone, what he does, he moves only 1 note which is actually changing on the dominant chord. It's pretty common to have a sharp 9, the Jimi Hendrix sound, Purple Haze. That's so that's a fairly common sound. However, with a major 7, that's a little strange. So just change that note from the major 7 to the minor 7. And it's interesting to note because usually this chord here, you wouldn't think of it as a resolution. It is a very tense sound. But in this case, comparing to what came next, what came before, we feel a little bit of a relief, right? So Yeah, then he moves into a bass pedal section in A, which actually bass pedals allow lots of freedom to whatever is happening on top. So what he does here, he uses chord planning again, just moving the same shapes here, E minor to A7, from B minor to G7, and then. But one thing that I think is very, very important, Toninho does a lot here throughout his career, is use the fourth finger on the left hand to reach for an extra note on top. This type of movement. In this case here, it's not an extra, it's not an extension. He's just reinforcing the major third of A7 on top. So the feeling that I got from that is that he's just trying to he gives the impression of a fuller sound, right? It feels like he would play all those notes if he had an extra string maybe on top. And also another topic that it's more evident on Stella, another analysis that I'll talk about, but that just his use of articulation. You can see this sliding. Just like exploring guitar possibilities, like this chord planing, which is very simple to do on the guitar, very guitar friendly. So, because at the same time, I think it's more, we get, by listening to his music, we get the impression that he's always trying to sound like other instruments. He does lots of this type of, how do you call that? Listen, no. Kind of harp-like sound. Or these gigantic chords that maybe piano-like, that voice that I showed a little earlier. So, but he also uses idiosyncrasies, I think that's the word, in things that are only possible on the guitar. So, one thing that we cannot go by, just still on Moonstone, to close what I have to say about Moonstone, his solutions for a very simple 2-5-1 progression, just his voice leading choices are very, very inventive. Right in the intro, we can see this. So what's happening here? It's just some 2-5-1 to E major, so F major to B7 to E major. So first off, he used that chord, the minor flat 6 chord. And in this case, it's very clear that is an inversion of F sharp minor because of the context. Like he's gonna play B7 later and resolve into E major. So, and we can know that there's a major triad sound going up here. Right? So there's an E major triad for the F sharp minor, and then E major triad on top of B, and then he resolves it with a F sharp major triad over E. Right? Little water, cheers. Okay. And then when he goes around the form, a different way that he does that. Instead of using the B7 altered, or with all 6 he uses just B7 sus. So, and that's how he resolved it. Interesting, when he gets to E major, that instead of just playing E major, he adds a major sharp 5 first. So that's the sound. And then resolves the sharp 5 into the 6, which is the last dissonant note. So what I also perceived here, if I don't play the root, see what you hear. There's a minor, like a hidden minor 5-1 progression inside just the E major going from sharp 5 to the 6th. So we can hear. Very good. Just closing up on Moonstone, another interesting progression that he does. There is a minor 2-5 progression. Just his exploration of density and once again unusual extension. Just he's adding a flat 13th to a half diminished chord, which is already a tense chord. It's already a powerful chord, just a half diminished. But he adds the flat 13 on top, and then this voice here for A flat 7, sharp 11, flat 9. It's very strange fingering because you have to do it once again a bar with finger 2 here to reach for the root and for the 7, find the 7. Right, and then he from those two very powerful, very distant, highly distant sounds, he goes into very sparse voicings with only 3 notes. There's one note that's doubled here, so that he ends the whole progression that building a whole lot of tension like that, and finally getting to a B flat triad, a root 5, third, and 5 again. So he's playing with density. Great, and the approach, the rhythmic approach there, I forgot to mention there is a rubato introduction here, but then once he starts playing the bossa nova feeling, it's a very similar approach to what he did on Beijo Partido. Now changing, still on the album Moonstone from '89, another composition of his, the last composition of his that I'll talk about, it's called Gershwin, a tribute to George Gershwin. Maybe this one I'll try to sing a little bit. Let's see how it feels. Or maybe not, because then it will give me a rest if I'm talking too much. It's called Gershwin. I'll play first and then talk about it. Then it goes on, basically the same similar voice. So here, I think it's important to talk. I haven't been talking too much about the composition itself, right? On the previous 2 songs, I have been talking more about the voicings. This one, I think it's important to start mentioning. First, it was very difficult to find out what he was thinking. The harmony changes a lot, go to different places, unusual modulations, and. But one thing that I noticed that unify the whole composition is that a flirting of changing between G major and G minor. So he starts here right in the introduction. We can know that he's playing A half diminished, which is in the key of G minor, and then there's this raised little progression back to C minor, and then he also uses G minor over F. So yeah, there's we can see this sound moving between G major and G minor. Another about the extensions that he's using. The first chord is very simple, just a G major with a 9, or that Bob Dylan could be using. But and then right after that he goes into this A half diminished, which there's a C minor sound on top, but the unusual voice here is this one. It's moving the top 2 notes from the 7 and the flat 5 to the 11 and the flat 13 on A half diminished. So, and you can see the stretch here is it's not easy to do if you're looking at it. So there's that. And there's a really nice progression that he does. Very interesting to note the voice leading the movement between. It's a progression in which he moves from 3 different chords. He moves every note, so that's sound like that. It's right here. Right. So from zooming in into F6, F major 6 to. There are various. We could focus on each of the movements, which we don't have time for, unfortunately. But I want to mention, it's interesting to note there's on the bottom here, there is a movement coming from a chromatic moving down from F sharp to F to E, while the top note moves chromatically up. You could hear that, right? And I think it's a very powerful melody going on top as well. This, which is called, we call it an enclosure, jazz. To me, that's a very powerful sound. And every note here from this chord, from the F to the E to the A, every note is moving. So, but still sounding cohesive. I think, yeah, that's enough of Gershwin. It's a very hard song to analyze. Maybe I'll write another paper just about that song. Now I'm going to move on to our final album here, which is called Once I Loved, from 1992. So switching gears twice here. Now he's playing standards. He's playing, I'm going to look at Stella by Starlight and My Funny Valentine, so not his compositions. And instead of just accompanying himself or somebody else, he's playing the melody by himself. On Stella, I just transcribed the introduction. So, little water. And Toninho's introduction to Stella by Starlight. Right. And then he goes into his own reharm of the song. He plays half of the song in one key, another half in another key. And but let's see what we have here. So lots of repeated. I don't know if it was very clear. I'll try to point out lots of elements that have been showing up in the other analysis as well. Right in the first bar here, we can see 2 of them. One of those big chords using all 6 strings. And the using the finger 4 to reach for an extra note. That's how he starts the arrangement. Great. So one thing that I mentioned that I haven't showed many examples, but I will now, how the polyphonic concept into harmony. How here there are many examples that he keeps the top note of the chord static, like on this C minor over G. He keeps the top note, but he moves the notes within the chord, which is not easy to do on the guitar. It's much easier to do on the piano. Like, he does a lot of that here. Just right before the bridge. There are a couple of examples. Then and that's another huge stretch that he does. He keeps the 11 on top of C minor. You can barely hear. Maybe even the reverb on his guitar. I'm not sure if he keeps that stretch, but I think he does. And then moves the minor 7 from C minor 7 to C major 7 to minor 7. Great. So a couple of chords that also could have different interpretations. Let me get to. I want to get to E's half diminished, but I can't get there without mentioning how nice this melodic. It's a melodic pedal that he's keeping the note B flat here. Very nice voice movement. The bass and the top note are moving in 11s. But then he finally gets to this E, which originally in the song is an E half diminished, right? Which could just be the case here. He could be just adding a F sharp, which is the 9, not completely crazy. But I must mention that this chord also has a little bit of a dominant quality, especially if you move the shape like that, which he doesn't. But just to show you that it could be also interpreted, those notes that he's playing here, F sharp is the 9, B flat is the flat 9, the flat 5, and the sharp 11, sorry, and D is the minor 7. So we could also see that chord as a dominant, with a dominant quality. What else on Stella? Well, also using elements things that could only be done on the guitar. Well, there's a whole lot of the articulation here. It's throughout the whole arrangement. I could play the whole thing again, and you could note like how he starts using by playing those notes, something we call hammer. Instead of playing each note or attacking each note, he's playing just the first and playing everything else legato. Also, approaching chords like that, he does literally when he gets to B sus to B7. It just it makes it more dramatic, right? Versus just hit the chord. So another interesting chord here, and another example of using the finger 4 as a extension, trying to and also another voice. I just mentioned the E case that could be a half diminished chord or a dominant chord. For A flat here, that's exactly the same case. This voice in here fits. It doesn't have the third. So if you add the minor third, it's half diminished. But if you add the major third, it's dominant. Same case. But he uses and here he uses a finger 4 bar to reach the 13th and the 11th. All right, so I'm probably skipping many things, but that's fine because I need to get to the last song, which is My Funny Valentine. So once again, I'm just going to play the transcription. There's nothing to sing here. So he changed, yeah, and then I'll talk about it in a little bit. My Funny Valentine. Or My Funny Quarantine. All right, so that was My Funny Valentine. What does he do here? So the tune is usually played in the key of C minor or E flat major. He changes it to A minor or C major, which allows him to use just more open string opportunities here. And he does use that right in the beginning as a, he keeps basically the notes E and B. Basically as a paddle as much as possible. He actually plays in time, but it's very slow. It's the way I played it sounds a little bit rubato, but it is a slow tempo. So he keeps those notes as paddles. And I don't know if you heard that very characteristic Toninho Horta that he played, the major 7 with a sharp major 7, sharp 9 appears here once again. Now let me situate you on the tune. The situation is a minor 2/5 to go back to A major. So normally it would be you gotta yell, and then that. But instead of hitting the melody note is the minor 3rd. So instead of a half diminished, he decides to use that chord, major 7 sharp, and then moving exactly as he does in Moonstone. He moves the major 7 to a minor 7, then resolves it on E minor. Cool. I think we're almost running out of time. I should give me like 2 more minutes. So he haven't used a whole lot of chordal voicings on the other analysis. Here he uses not too much though. It's not a few over on the bridge. He plays. For C major, he plays this voicing, which is, we call it the so what voicing, very famous on the Miles Davis composition. So that's the sound that he applies here. And then he uses the sound of this chord, the so what voicing has a major, it's fourths, and a major third on top, a minor third on top. But then when he returns to the sound of fourths, he's again on the last A. He uses actually just fourths, no major. And chord planning again, moving the entire chord a whole step up. Reaching for different extensions. Speaking of chord planning, right before reaching this section here, the last A, there is the E7 chord in which he uses this shape here. I'm just gonna analyze the notes. Speaking of the first shape that he's using here, it's dominant 7 chord with a sharp 9 and sharp 5. Basically an E7 altered. He changes the shape 3 times. Uses his. So it's a very interesting sound. Each mostly we can associate that sound even if you keep moving with the whole tone scale, right? It's the melody on top, and the vast majority of those notes fit the whole tone scale. There is one in the middle here that doesn't, so it's a little bit of a strange sound, but using chord planning. And finally, just returning to that same the minor flat 6. He actually, I didn't point out every time, but he used it in every arrangement here, in every example that I showed. He used that thing of a shape of a minor chord, but with a flat 6. But how does he use that on My Funny Valentine? Well, on the end, like there's an A7 chord. So that he's usually played as A7, I think D7, A minor, D7, G minor, C7. He adds another 2/5 progression, but instead of A, with the root in A flat. So, and how does he use that shape that I just mentioned? It's here. So he's moving while the bass player is playing A flat. He's playing the minor third, the 11, the minor 7, and the 9 on top. And then doing exactly the same movement that he did on the introduction of Beijo Partido, if you remember, he did. So now he used this exactly same shape, moving the same fingers the same way, however, that with a different connotation, because here it's very clear that he's implying a 2/5 progression with the bass here. So you can always instantly hear. Cool. And then he does the same thing going back minor second. The finger 4 very active always. And fantastic. And he does a whole lot of other very interesting things that I didn't mention, but that's as much as I could cover with this time.